This is Beyond Species, a podcast exploring issues around speciesism and the struggle to dismantle it. I'm Tofu Steve, and welcome to the first episode of Beyond Species. In this episode, we hear from Shoana. Shoana is based in the US and spent time working on a small-scale dairy farm which marketed itself as ethical and humane. Shoana speaks to some of the problems inherent in dairy farming and shines a light on the suffering that results from it. We spent a bit of time towards the end of the show discussing Million Dollar Vegan. The episode begins with Shoana giving us some background about how she got into activism.
So I had my first experience with activism actually as a really young girl. I must have been 12 years old, and I somehow stumbled on the PETA website. So I saw animals being used in circuses. I learned about animals in laboratories, and I decided to make some flyers, make a poster, and go and do some street activism by myself and try to kind of raise awareness about animals being used in circuses. So that was my very first experience. And then I kind of got distracted with other things, as a young uh, adolescent. I was doing sports and other things. So I didn't really follow through with the activism, but I got reconnected around 2010. The BP oil spill happened in the Gulf of Mexico, and that really shook my world. I was coming home after class and logging onto this website where you could watch a live feed of the oil, the 60,000 barrels of oil flowing into the Gulf of Mexico every single day. And it was so infuriating that I just thought, I have to do something. I can't just sit and watch this happen. I need to get out there, and I know that people are mobilizing and there's other people that care. I got really involved with environmental activism and um, everything from fighting pipelines to gas fired power plants, and trying to promote a fossil fuel divestment campaign in the state that I was living in, trying to get a carbon tax passed and things like that. So I really liked what the environmental movement was doing. It was so diverse. And for example, like in 2014 with the People's Climate March in New York City, where over 300,000 people marched, it was everything from indigenous people um, to I saw a lot of vegan people there too, but it was just so many different groups coming together, and I loved that.
And were you vegan at that stage? No.
No, no, I was not vegan yet, but it was
But you noticed that there were a lot of vegans there, so you knew like what it was.
definitely, yeah. Yeah, no, my journey was very long. It took me a long time to get to this conclusion.
You were an environmental activist and not vegan, contrary to the meme.
hmm Yeah, I was very
Yeah.
passionate, and I was trying to do my part, and I was definitely reducing my meat consumption, but I know I wasn't
Okay.
fully vegan.
Okay. And then what happened next?
So I saw a movie called Food Inc.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you've seen
hmm
it. It's very good, and it really blew my mind at the corruption in with the government and with the lobbyists that are influencing our food and what people have access to, and just how much power they have. So that really sparked an interest in wanting to work for an organization that was trying to do the right thing within a system that was already in place in society. So, for example, people are eating meat, and that's I my mentality was that's not changing anytime soon. So why don't I work for an organization that's promoting higher animal welfare
Hmm.
standards? Because I thought that was the future. Like, people are going to wake up and they're going to realize the ethical problems with eating animals, and they're going to look for a solution, but not actually, have to change their eating habits. So, yeah, I discovered a certified humane labeling company that basically inspects farms that are raising animals for food and make sure that they are meeting a certain number of standards that have been created by a whole board of experts. So anything from like veterinarians to animal behaviorists. Um, and they've basically outlined standards that say, like, hey, these animals will live a much like a less stressful life and be able to engage in natural behaviors if they have a certain amount of space, if the chickens have nesting boxes and dust baths and perches and all these kind of like enrichment,
Okay.
tools. So I did that for a little while,
Right.
and then I decided I really wanted hands-on experience. So I decided to work on a local dairy
So
farm.
did you leave the humane like certification body for a totally new job at the farm, or it was just like a work exchange or something like that?
Yeah, I actually left the
Hmm.
humane labeling company, and decided to work full time on the dairy farm.
Okay. So what were you thinking at that time then? You wanted to get into farming, dairy farming? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to. I felt like a whole new world had opened up, and I was just like a sponge. I was like, I want to learn
Hmm.
everything about the system and animals, and how this whole
Okay.
system works, and how, kind of like the
Yeah.
farm to
So
table
really from that
process.
environmental angle, you were like, okay, we can really save the environment and treat animals well by doing this humane farming. So, okay.
Hmm. Yeah, so I basically thought, okay, local farms are much smaller. It's not anything like factory farming. So there's more personalized care for the animals. And, realistically, you can't feed the world with like that kind of operation. So I figured, people are going to consume a lot
Mm,
less animal products. But when they do, they're going to be conscious about it and want to support their local
okay.
farmers and
Yeah.
buy it locally.
Okay. That's interesting. I can see that. So it's like you could envision a world where factory farming would end and people would start caring about animals more and just want um, meat and dairy from their local farm. So we'd go back to local
Hmm.
farming, really. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like much
Hmm.
more community
Okay.
based. Yeah, so I worked there for a year, and I did everything from bottling milk to managing the farm store. I helped the cheesemaker make cheese, and I did farm tours. So I did like marketing and outreach, trying to get the farm more connected to the public. Um, so yeah, I learned so much about the whole operation, and the unique thing about this dairy farm was, it was a raw milk dairy farm. So this is um, basically straight from the cow into a
Hmm.
bulk tank. There's no processing in between. So it's not homogenized. So the milk fat, the fat separates
Okay.
from the milk. And it's also not pasteurized, which is when they heat the milk to a certain temperature to kill off
Yeah.
pathogens. So this is pretty risky. like it, you, yeah.
I was going to say, is that yeah, well, were there any, what are the health consequences of that, of raw milk?
So yeah, the potential to get very sick from this is
Hmm.
is real, because there are so many bacteria that can enter the milk supply, whether it's coming from an infection in the cow's udder, or maybe the equipment hasn't been cleaned properly and has
Mm.
bacteria growing on it. So there's, or maybe during the bottling
Mm-hmm.
process, things can get. So there's so many aspects where humans can get exposed to things like E. coli, which is very prevalent because the animals are laying in their own feces a lot of the time. But also things like they would have staph
Mm.
infections, they would have listeria
Wow. Okay.
sometimes. So there were so many different. It's like a scary.
Yeah, it's a bit like a Russian roulette.
It
It's a gamble.
exactly. So some parts of the U.S. actually have
Mm.
made it illegal because it's just not worth the
Mm-hmm.
public's health, to risk the
Mm.
public's health. So to try to reduce the risk, they have said in the state I was living, they said, okay, you can sell it on the farm, at the farm store. And then in other states, they'll allow it at the grocery store, but a lot of grocery stores don't want to take the risk. So, to reduce the risk, also, they had us do on site
Okay.
testing. So, I was a part of that process. And then they also have a health inspector come and take a sample from the bulk tank.
And like, what did you often find things from the testing?
Yeah. One of the most common issues that I think every farmer deals with is having a somatic cell count
Okay.
that's too high, which is, when the cows have udder infections like mastitis, basically shows the bacteria count jumping pretty high. So they wanted us to keep it below a certain level. And, you know, sometimes it was explosive, and we would have to then take individual samples from each cow and then send it off to Cornell University
Wow.
in New York and have them do individual sample testing so we could figure out which cow was sick, because you really can't tell by
Mm.
looking at them. It's all happening inside, and it's being, they're being hooked up to these machines, and it's all being mixed together.
So we're
So
talking about pus, right?
yeah,
Somatic cell count.
yeah, it's like a pussy discharge, which to a certain extent
Yeah.
is allowed in the milk because it's just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
inevitable. But yeah, sometimes we were over that level, and when we would send the samples to Cornell, they would also come back and show us what other bacteria were found in the milk.
Okay, so this is
So
quite a high risk business. How many cows were
we were milking about 100.
there? Okay.
And the other unique thing about this business model for this particular farm was that the owner was vegetarian, and so were a lot of the people that worked on the farm. So they did not believe in sending the
Mm-hmm.
cows to slaughter. So it's completely contradictory to what the dairy business model is built
Mm-hmm.
on, which is that you're going to be getting a product from the animal when
Mm-hmm.
they have given birth, which is the milk, but then eventually they need to go to slaughter when
Yeah.
they can't produce, so that you can also make money off of, so that they're not like a
Mm-hmm.
liability anymore. You can't just like put them out to pasture to retire. It would just
Yeah.
cost you money. So not sending the animals to slaughter, it sounded really noble, but what happened is we had 100 cows giving birth in a season, and then all of a sudden you have 200 cows, and it's like, how do you
Yeah. So
afford
normally,
that,
would they want to keep the baby cow with the mother?
No, so we would separate the cows from their babies at
Right.
birth, and we would actually collect the colostrum, which is like the first milk that comes out that has all the
Mm-hmm.
probiotics for the baby. We would collect it and we would feed it to the baby with a bottle. And so all the calves were bottle fed and had no bond with their mother at all.
Okay. So how soon would they be separated from the mother after birth?
Pretty much immediately, if we saw the baby
Mm-hmm.
born in the field, we would
So
separate
even
them.
with the male calves, they wouldn't want to send them to slaughter. They would just what hang on to them. And this is where their problem came
Yeah.
about because they had doubled their herd size.
Yeah, so it was such a dilemma because I don't think the owner thought it through for the long run. Like, what happens when we
Hmm.
have 400 cows? What happens when we have
Yeah,
500 cows? So the herd just kept growing and growing. And he had different properties around the state, and he would just like put them out there to graze and this and that, but with very little um, oversight. Like, there was just so many cows on all these different properties. They weren't being looked after. It was just kind of like you put them out there and someone will swing by like once a week to go check
mm,
on them. So yeah, even the male calves were he was trying to give them to people as like pets or if you want a
yeah,
lawnmower. Like here's it's like it wasn't realistic. No one really wants like a 1,500 pound or 2,000 pound bull.
yeah,
No one is set up to to be having an animal like that. So it was a struggle. And so when that happens and you really start to hit financial problems that way, the cow's health really ends up suffering.
yeah. So did I mean, I'm assuming at some point then cows did end up going to slaughter, even though this owner didn't want that to happen because they just needed to do something about it, or
Yeah, eventually it was really heartbreaking because they had us telling the public that, oh, we don't send the cows to slaughter, and that makes everyone so happy to hear. But then I was talking to one of the farm managers, and he said he was at one of our offsite properties, and the cattle dealer had just taken 30
hmm,
cows. And I was like, wait a minute. The cattle dealer, like, we have no clue where those cows are going once they're in the hands of the cattle
yeah,
dealer. And so I can guarantee, because the dairy industry
uh-huh.
is very small in that state, and I guarantee that they ended up at an auction and went to
Yeah,
slaughter.
I mean, what else could have happened, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it was really heartbreaking. I left very
Hmm.
soon after that because I saw so much suffering, and I had I just had a very naive vision of what this farm was going to be like. Um, you think that there's individualized care for the animals, and they will be looked after and handled so well, but it's just that it was just unrealistic. If you saw, the amount of people
Hmm.
that were working there, and we were working like 7 days a week, so hard, and it just when you have 100 cows, I mean, and then all the babies, it was too much to handle, and the cows were having a lot of health issues too.
Yeah. How many staff were there approximately?
Approximately 10, I
Right.
think. Yeah, and it was there were people that were out haying fields, and there were people that were caring for the calves, and then it was the farm store, and it was the milk, milking
Hmm.
the dairy herd. And so the cows got milked twice a day
Right.
from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. and then 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. So it took 4 hours,
Yeah.
and it was one lady and an assistant, and it was nothing fancy. It wasn't like a rotating milking parlor where they walk in and robots are milking them. It was a woman like hand sanitizing by hand each teat and then putting a machine like a suction
Yeah.
machine on each udder.
Wow.
So and yeah, we had illegal immigrants working on the farm,
Hmm.
um, and the woman who was milking the cows was also living in poverty and um, was living a very difficult life and was doing a very intense job. It was very like physically, it was very difficult.
Okay. And were they selling this raw milk? Were like people showing up to buy it? Like, was it
Yeah.
profitable from that side at least, or not profitable, but they were selling the
So
stuff?
yeah, so the farm was not profitable,
Yeah.
um, if you looked at the books,
Yeah.
but we were selling the milk, and it was selling for $9 a gallon,
Okay. I don't know how much a
which
gallon is, but is
it
that
is
a lot?
it's like 3 to 4 times the amount that you can buy at the grocery store because it was considered a specialty product because it
Uh-huh.
was raw.
So there was a demand for this raw milk in that area, but the kind of conflict came about within the business model
Hmm.
because the owner didn't want to kill any of the cows, but kind of had to.
Right. Yeah. And also, the land in
Mm.
that part of the US is just so expensive. Like, I
Mm.
think this was like a multi-million-dollar property, and it was always his dream to own this farm as a kid.
Right.
And he was definitely subsidizing the farm with his own personal finances.
Wow. So it was like a labor of love for this owner.
Yeah, it was like he had this idealistic vision of what the farm
Yeah, how
could
it would
be,
be.
but it was totally mismanaged, and the cows, you know, were suffering. And yeah, I saw really sick cows, and cows that were dying and collapsing from things like milk fever,
Mm.
when their body's losing a lot of calcium
Mm.
after they give birth. They get very weak and will collapse on the ground, and it's not an easy process to get a huge animal like that to get on their feet when they don't want to get on their feet, and they can't.
So that's a downer cow then. Is that what they call them?
Yeah, downer cow.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so, did you see how they dealt with downers?
Yeah, that was probably the most traumatic thing that I experienced when I was there. Um, yeah, there was a cow named Lynette. They all had numbers on
Mm.
like a number tag, but they also gave them names. And
Oh.
yeah, Lynette was very sick. She had milk fever, and a lot of the dairy herd we had were Jersey cows, which are a smaller breed, and they're easy to handle, and they are very productive, like milk wise.
Hmm.
But Lynette was a Guernsey, which is a much bigger breed,
Hmm.
and I remember pulling into work and seeing her on the ground, not in the field, not in the pasture with the other girls, but by herself, and people standing around her.
Mm.
And I realized there was something really wrong. Um, so I kind of let the farm managers, do their thing, and I didn't want to interrupt, but I kept looking out the window of the farm store trying to see what they were doing. And all of a sudden, they bring over a tractor, and uh, this piece of equipment that looked like a torture device. It was like a metal clamp
Hmm.
attached to a giant chain.
Right.
And I didn't realize, because I really thought there was like I don't know, a gentle, nice way to assist them onto their feet,
Mm.
like maybe like a harness with some padding, and you would put it around their
Yeah.
stomach and around their chest. No, that's totally not how this was going to happen. They took this clamp, attached it to her hip bones, because dairy cows are much bonier than
Hmm.
ones that are bred to be raised for their flesh.
Hmm.
So they attached this clamp. They're
Hmm.
like cranking it tight onto her hip bones, and then they attach a chain to it, and they use a tractor to lift her hips into the air.
Mm.
And the idea is that once they realize they're being lifted off the ground, that they'll then also put their own front feet under them.
Hmm.
And she was so weak
Wow.
that she couldn't get herself up, so they were just dangling her in the air pretty much. And they tried it so many times, and I it was really, really stressful to watch, and it was must have been incredibly painful for her.
Mm.
So they tried that for a day or two. They would let her rest, and then
Jesus.
they would try again. And by day two, she had struggled so much that she had bed sores pretty much on her knees
Mm.
because of the struggle, just like rubbing the skin raw.
Yeah.
So eventually they called the vet out, and
So they hadn't, well, they'd maybe called the vet out at the start, but they hadn't for these 2 days while they were doing this ridiculous operation.
yeah, Yeah, that's a common um, practice
Mm.
that you'll see on any farm is everyone tries to do it themselves first.
So
It's
yeah,
really not cost effective to call the vet out, which will charge like over $100 to even drive to your property.
yeah. So this had been going on for 2 days, and then they decided, okay, we better call the vet because this isn't happening. So then the vet arrives.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, and you know, they were so optimistic. Um,
who's this? The workers on the farm.
yeah, the
Yeah.
two farm managers, they, I think they had emotional attachments to the animals, and they couldn't look at the situation objectively to say, you know what, her chances of survival are not high at all at this point. Instead, they had this emotional attachment to her as like, we don't want to let her go. Like, we have a history with her and like, we want to see her make it.
Mm.
Where I was looking at it kind of as like, I've seen what she's been going through. Like, she's not going to make it. Like, you could just see she was in terrible shape.
Yeah.
So when they had the vet out, they the vet kind of leaves it up to the farm manager to decide. And he really didn't have much advice. He looked at her and said, yeah, she definitely has milk fever and it doesn't look good, but there's nothing really I can do for her. So it's up to you. And
Mm.
the farm managers, they talked on the phone and they decided, okay, well, we're going to give her another chance. We're going
Jeez.
to and it was like the vet's there, like this is your opportunity to kind of help her out of her misery,
Mm.
and so they decided, okay, we're going to give her another chance. And I was standing there watching them deliberating, and I said, you know what, I said, Donald, she's not going to make it. This isn't fair. This is not fair to her. And he immediately said, you're right. I actually think we need to put her down.
Mm.
And so yeah, the vet decided to put her down. And again, I was very naive, and I thought that we would have a choice.
Mm.
I thought maybe she could get like an injection or something,
Mm.
but that's not possible when you have a 1,500-pound animal. So they
Mm.
do the same thing that they do in slaughterhouses, and they bolt them with a gun
Mm.
in their head. So he pulls out the gun, and the farm manager said, I can't watch this. And he turned his back on her.
Mm.
And I remember feeling like, I don't want to watch this either, but I need to know the truth. Like, I need to know what this is like and what we put her through.
Mm.
So, yeah, I was 20, I was 22, 23, and I decided to watch him shoot her in the head. And it was really traumatizing. It's the most traumatic thing I've ever seen.
Mm.
So he shot her in the head, and then um, basically her body started fighting it.
Mm.
Um, and so she, although her head fell to the ground and she was laying down,
Mm.
she began running. Like her legs were running, even
Okay.
though she was in place. And
Yeah.
it was horrifying. It was like she was trying to run away from the vet.
Yeah.
So
I've seen that action on video footage.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really traumatizing because you're like
Mm.
this, like we're trying to take her out of her misery, but it's actually the most traumatizing thing she's experiencing as she takes her last few breaths.
Yeah. I mean, I, I think when I see that, I think that is someone in complete and total pain, panic, stress, fear. I know they try and say, oh, it's just nerves or whatever, um, but I don't believe that at all.
Yeah, that's exactly what the vet said. I mean, she was thrashing around so much, he actually looked really concerned. And
Mm.
he looked at me because he's like, oh no, like I'm being watched by this young girl.
Mm.
And he looked at me and he was like, just so you know, I checked her eyes, and she's brain dead. It's just nerves. And I was
Mm,
like, I didn't believe him. And you know what? I don't think he believed himself because he
yeah.
ended up shooting her again in the head.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so it took two shots to,
Hmm.
I think, finally actually kill her.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, um, what were you thinking at this moment? I know it's hard, but I mean, this is like you'd seen a lot of stuff on the farm already. Your kind of eyes had been opened to this humane myth, that had drawn you into this business in the first place.
Hmm.
And now you're watching this. It's like, it's kind of like the ultimate lesson in why the humane thing is a lie, anyway.
Yeah.
So, what's going on in your head in that point? Are you like, you left soon after this?
Yeah, I left very soon after. There were other cows that were sick as well that
Hmm.
didn't get medical attention. And so, yeah, I left really soon after. And I actually reported them to the MSPCA.
Okay.
And
So is that like our RSPCA? It's like
yeah, exactly.
against cruelty to animals, that kind of
Hmm.
thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the salt on the wound is that they didn't do anything. They said I told them exactly when they could go there, that the farm is open to the public and that they milk the cows from 4 to 8 p.m. And you can walk right into the barn and you can see them up close. And people come and watch us milk the cows all the time. And so they went to two of our properties, the main farm where we milked the cows, and then they went to what we called the home farm, which is where the farmer's home was and where all the calves were raised.
Hmm.
And so they first went to the home farm, which didn't show anything alarming because we had this really nice um, indigenous woman working there who like hand fed all the babies and took really good care of them, um, despite their circumstance of being in the hutches and being totally isolated. She was a very kind person, and so the MSPCA worker talked to her and kind of they just do a walkthrough and they say, okay, the animals look well fed and they have access to water and shelter and there's nothing to see here. So, and then when they went to the dairy farm where we were milking the cows, they couldn't see them up close because they were way back in the field and they're not allowed to trespass and go into the field.
Hmm.
So they said, we've noted and logged, your photos that you sent us and your claims about the farm, but there's nothing we can do at this time.
Yeah.
And farm animals don't have the same protections as our pets do. So I mean, I don't even really know what they would have done anyways, you know.
Yeah. It's really just like a paperwork exercise, isn't it? It's I don't know. I wouldn't call it greenwashing, but something like that.
Yeah, I think that the people that work at the organization care,
Uh-huh.
but the animals are considered livestock. So,
Yeah. They've got a framework to work within, so
yeah, so maybe you get a citation or maybe you get a fine or maybe they, require that you have a vet out to look at that one cow, but they don't look at the overall system of like, you know, how many bales of hay are you putting out every day? Where are you getting it from? What's the quality? You know, what are the health checks or how
mhm.
often is the vet coming? They're not looking at the overall
Mm.
system and how the whole business operates. It's just like they'll deal with like one specific case.
Yeah.
So,
Wow, okay.
yeah.
So while you were working there on the farm, you weren't vegan yet.
No, yeah, I was not vegan.
Yeah. And so when was it after working there that you went vegan, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so I left the farm and I, over the next couple years, like really reduced my meat consumption. Um, I think I was very slowly putting the pieces together, but I was not ready to let go of like a lot of my habits and traditions. And I had a major cheese addiction
Mm,
because I'm originally from the Netherlands, and we
okay.
pride ourselves on our cheese production and consumption. So
Yeah.
it wasn't until I saw Cowspiracy, and that really made me question whether I was doing everything I could to be an environmentalist. Even though I considered myself an environmentalist, it really made me question whether I was taking personal responsibility in my own life, and
Mm,
was I fully engaged to the best of my ability in the environmental movement if my heart was in the right place.
mhm. That's
So,
interesting, actually,
yeah.
because at this stage, you're still thinking of the environmental aspect mostly, even after all the stuff you've seen on the farm.
Hmm. Yeah. I basically was was I guess the excuse or explanation was that the farm wasn't run properly,
Mm,
and that the suffering was mostly due to the animals being underfed, and that's
mhm,
why they were having health issues. And so at one point, I briefly took a farm business planning course to figure out if I could maybe, do it better. Like I
mhm,
wouldn't be running the whole operation the way he was,
mm.
and kind of like thinking that there was a better way to do things.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting, isn't it? Because yeah, it's like you looked at that farm and thought, well, that's just mismanagement. This is probably a one-off. There'll be better farms out there doing this exact same thing, but just like much, much better. I'll
hmm.
just learn how to get good at doing this as a business, and I'll do it much
Hmm.
better. The cows looked after and all that kind
Exactly.
of stuff. Yeah, so the things we tell ourselves, even after seeing upfront, I think it's so hard to um, imagine that the entire system is broken, like that it won't
Hmm.
work, that it actually. I, I guess I've been thinking a lot about this recently about capitalism and how all of this boils down to the property status of non-human animals and obviously nature and other humans. And so that's why it won't work, is because you're commodifying a non-human animal. So you're
Exactly.
going to need to exploit them in multiple ways. There's no way out of it other than
Hmm.
to not use them at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because the conditioning that I had was so deep when I was there that, I really thought that we could be like working in tandem with them to, we could use them, but we could treat them well.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I remember asking one of the farm managers, I said, well, if they didn't like it, why did they line up at the barn
Mm-hmm.
every day around 4 p.m.? They would all be huddled there.
Yeah.
And he said, well, how do you think you would feel if you had just given birth and you were lactating and you weren't getting any relief from that?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, yeah. I mean, not only are they standing there going, oh my gosh, please relieve this pressure from my udders, like they're
Mm-hmm.
full of milk. We've bred them to overproduce milk. I can't
Yeah.
even imagine how uncomfortable they were. And in the winter months, they didn't want to be outside. They wanted to be in the warm barn.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, their body temperatures actually are really like much higher than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And when they all came together in the barn would get so warm that it
Mm.
would melt the snow off the roof.
Wow.
So for them to come in and be warm for a little while, and they would get some corn silage, which is like
Mm.
a sweet fermented corn that they loved,
Yeah.
and for them to have some pressure released from their udders was actually enough motivation for them to start syncing up with our schedule
Mm-hmm.
to exploit them when we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to. and and because I was so conditioned, I was like, look, they want it, like
Yeah,
they're totally complicit, like
yeah,
complying with us. And it's just not true. We've created a system where they are uncomfortable.
yeah. That that image you described, I see it all the time whenever the news goes to visit a dairy farm. You'll always see the cows lining up, and they're eating, and they seem content. That's the way it's portrayed. And the farmer will always say stuff like they enjoy being milked, and they use
Hmm.
that imagery of all the cows lining up as if they're rushing to get in there because they love it. And people see that like a few seconds on the news in this like report, and that's what they'll be telling themselves in their head as well.
Hmm.
And the farmers
Exactly.
play into that image, uh, and they know, what you are told.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And no one ever thinks about, wait, why are they acting this way? What have we done to them
yeah,
for them to actually look like they're enjoying it?
yeah,
They're not enjoying it. I mean, it's even, the cows that had the udder infections,
mm,
they'd lift their leg and they would look really irritated when you were putting the machine on their udders. Like, it
mm,
doesn't feel good for
mm,
them. So, yeah, it was just, wow. Looking back, I'm like, I was just, it's just so mind blowing how I used to view it. But I really do appreciate that the farm manager was honest with me and said, well, how would you feel if you were
mm,
lactating? And I was like, yeah, you're so right. This is a whole system that we created, and we get to have the narrative attached to it that we want.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're getting to where you went vegan. We're not there yet.
Yeah,
So,
so to wrap it up,
uh,
um, I basically finally, it was almost like I'd been doing this like really long research project, and I was finally putting it all together. And the final piece for me was watching What the Health and realizing I could be totally healthy and not eat any animal products.
mhm,
I think that was still a mental block for me.
okay,
So, yeah, so that was 2.5 years ago, and it was truly the best decision. And I feel great and I feel more aligned. I feel like myself. I feel like how I felt when I was young and just like so passionate about helping animals
mm,
and yeah, I finally feel like I'm becoming the person I was meant to be.
okay. $1 million vegan.
Okay. Where to begin?
Yeah. So just to for anyone who's listening who doesn't know about $1 million vegan, this is a well, there's an organization called $1 million Vegan, and they've got a campaign. They want President Trump to go vegan for, I think it's 31 days. And if he does that, they'll then give him $1 million that he can donate to a veterans charity of his choice. And some of the problems that I see with this, and a lot of other people are seeing with this, is that this campaign is appealing to possibly one of the worst people on the planet who is responsible for so much of what we're against in the vegan movement as a social justice movement. And the way that the $1 million Vegan campaign is presenting itself, it comes across as being nationalist, pro military, patriotic, and pro Trump. Because when you look at their Instagram page, you'll see a lot of photos of military personnel. Um, the other thing is they're using children a lot. They have these group of children called Animal Hero Kids, and they're doing a lot of the videos and the posts. And they're the ones like asking Trump to go vegan, and even the campaign slogan, they're saying they want Trump to go vegan because it's good for the nation's health, and it'll make Donald Trump more healthy. uh, and it says, and the hashtag is like "Make America Healthy Again."
Mhm.
So, what's wrong with this campaign? What's right
So
with
many
it?
things. I know. I mean, I think we're just going to keep seeing this. They're going to keep reinventing it.
Mm,
Like they were trying to get the Pope to go vegan for
mhm,
Lent. And now I was shocked that they have targeted the least likely person
mhm.
to go vegan
Yeah, yeah,
and then said if he does, we'll give $1 million to a veterans organization.
yeah.
I
Of
mean,
his
if I
choice, by
was
the way.
of
Yeah,
oh
so
yeah, that
I
too.
mean, who the fuck would he choose? Like, I dread to think. Anyway, sorry, carry
Yeah. So I feel like I feel sad for veterans that may have seen it. Um, it's so unlikely that this message will even reach Donald Trump. I mean, he's incredibly self centered. He has a lot of other things going on, such as an impeachment
on. Yeah,
and possible jail time.
yeah.
So, amongst other things. So, that's really strange to pick the least likely person who doesn't have any clue about social justice, about justice at
In
all.
fact,
Like
he
for
works
even
against justice, you could say.
yeah, he's like like, separating migrant families and keeping them in these overcrowded
Hmm.
cages and children have died and he couldn't care
No.
less. And when he gives a speech and they fact check him afterwards, he's a pathological
Yeah.
liar. There's just so many lies. So if he says he's going to go
Hmm.
vegan, uh, he's probably
Hmm.
lying and he probably is not going to follow through. Not that that
Hmm.
matters, but he's just such a walking contradiction. There's no way that he is the best person to be sharing this message. It's
No.
totally inconsistent with everything he stands
So
for.
the thing about Million Dollar Vegan, and they've had a lot of criticism on their, well, from what I've seen on their Instagram page, and some of their responses have been along the lines of that they are non-political, and
Hmm.
that um, when they did the Pope campaign and asked the Pope to go vegan for Lent, it resulted in 1,000 media articles about veganism because of this. So they're saying by appealing to someone with such a huge reach, they are getting veganism out there into like the mainstream press, I guess, which we as animal rights activists struggle to do a lot. Like a lot of our focus is on trying to get people to talk about, you know, how we exploit animals and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
so the problems I have, or what I, my take on it is this: that first of all, obviously, we've had a lot of talk recently in the movement about how you can't be non-political if you're involved in veganism or animal rights
Mm-hmm.
because it's a political movement. Also, it's a left-wing political movement that's not up for debate, even though a lot of people think it is. And I think either the people behind this campaign are either incredibly naive, but I don't think they are because I think to be able to raise $1 million and get all these people to do all these things for you, and there's a lot of people involved in this campaign, you need to kind of know what you're doing. So I think it's intentional, and I don't know exactly who the backers are, and I've like no proof this is speculation, but they're appealing to Trump supporters ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
So that is like a right wing approach. So talking about veganism at any cost isn't acceptable, really. For them to say, well, hey, we got 1,000 bits of media last time, there's going to be more this time, but what is the actual, what is what is actually being said about veganism? Because all that's going to come across is in very short articles in numerous media across the world. These people asked Trump to go vegan, and you just associate Trump and veganism very quickly in your mind. and
Mhm.
that's it. There's no more substance to it. So I just think it's an intentional campaign to support Trump. Really, it's a kind of roundabout way of vegan washing him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you look at the
Oh,
social media, you see soldiers, and you
yeah.
say people saying they're concerned about the health of our nation. So you've got pro-military, you've got nationalism. Uh, I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's intentional. I think it's not a naive. Oh, hey, we don't care about politics. We just want to get the word vegan out there, and what it's about. I mean, that's not.
Hmm.
I don't buy that. If you've got $1 million sitting in the bank, maybe they don't even have that. Maybe that's made up.
Yeah, that I couldn't figure out either. That they have all these philanthropists that are
Hmm.
willing to do this.
Yeah, who is the
I don't understand
philanthropist
it.
or the philanthropists? Because I would bet they're not left wing people who want social justice.
Hmm. Yeah, it's there's so many problems with this. It just like I can't even believe it. But yeah, it's just so strange. And Trump proposed a budget that would cut funding to
Mm,
veterans. So it's like to then have these to then have this a campaign where it's like they'll be donating to veterans, and then he's going to get the praise
mm,
because he made it happen if he goes vegan. It's like, you know what, you also could have structured a budget where you were actually helping veterans all this time. So it's so
yeah.
strange, and I really don't see this being successful. I don't see it being clever at all to be aligning with someone like this, and
Mm. And
it's not getting the movement anywhere.
no, and even if he did go vegan, which if anything, it would be plant based. He wouldn't be vegan anyway because he doesn't have any of the kind of moral values that go along with it.
Exactly.
He would just ridicule it. He'd do some fucking stupid tweet about joking about how he's going vegan or something. But
Yeah, exactly. No one ever thought about what if he actually is really outspoken about it and against it. He's got his
yeah,
whole following then, just being validated
that
that
vegans
that's
are
not
just
something that they would
yeah,
ever
exactly.
that they would ever
Yeah,
consider.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's probably right now. I think this campaign is like symbolic of just how skewed the movement has become. That we're in such desperate need for media attention that we will do do this kind of thing. And even if the
Mhm.
people who are doing this campaign, like I say, I think they know what they're doing and it's intentional. It's all the other people in the vegan movement who are kind of oblivious or like, hey, well, this is fine because it's talking about veganism. We don't care about politics, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That's what worries me more. Like the people doing it, yeah, we know they're fucking up to something, right? But it's everyone else going like, "Hey, stop giving them a hard time. You're working against the message. This is for the animals." All that kind of talk.
Yeah, it's really difficult to receive that message from the community because you don't want to speak out when you
Mm,
know something's not right. You don't want to speak out because they're like, "Aren't you for the
yeah,
animals? We'll do anything by any means to do this for the
yeah,
animals." And then they talk about the the potential of like what the outcome could be if he went vegan,
hmm
or it's great, when this person that has high
hmm
visibility is speaking up, and
yeah,
it's so complicated. But I it's because of the justice movements are just really complex and people don't quite understand it. um, and I
yeah,
don't either. I'm still
yeah. Well,
learning,
that's it.
and I'm learning by really going through our history and like seeing how it all came about. As new vegans, we tend to just also look at it in the
Hmm
moment, and we're just like, oh,
hmm
I saw a funny quote that was like James
hmm
Aspie I may be saying this wrong, but it was like James Aspey didn't start the
Oh,
vegan
yeah.
movement or something, or, you know, because it's like we just see it in this moment of what we're being exposed to, and then we forget to look at the past and how it's been done, and what it actually takes to create
Yeah.
change. And so
And it's a lot more.
someone's
It's a lot
yeah.
more than buying burgers and buying vegan options and thinking that's it. And like outreaching to
Mm-hmm.
people on the street and saying, hey, would you think about going vegan? It's really easy to get almond milk now. Like that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Outreach is fine as part of clever strategic campaigning, but just on its own, it's like, um,
it's not getting us
no,
there.
definitely not. Okay, so I think we've covered $1 million vegan. Like,
Yes, definitely. We picked
yeah,
it
it's like
apart.
it's fucking my head just explodes with that shit.